cabin was quiet. A federal air marshal collapsed. Blood spilled into the aisle, and while trained adults froze, a 15-year-old black teenager stepped forward, pressed his hands into the wound, and saved a life. But instead of being praised, he was shackled, detained, treated like a criminal. Why would saving someone's life turn into an arrest? Why was no one listening to what really happened on that flight? And what does it say about us when the color of a boy's skin makes people see threat instead of hero? This is not just a story about an airplane. It's a story about courage in the face of silence, about dignity when no one gives it freely, and about how one moment at 30,000 feet revealed the fractures and the hope in our justice system. Stay with us as we follow the true journey of Malik Grant, and what happened in Seat 17B that shook a nation wide awake. If this story moves, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. Malik Grant pressed his forehead gently against the cool airplane window, watching clouds stretch into endless cotton fields beneath the Skyloom air flight. His breath fogged the glass for a moment before he wiped it away with the cuff of his faded hoodie. He was seated in 18A, next to an elderly woman who hadn't spoken a word since takeoff. That suited him just fine. Malik was 16, and like most 16-year-old boys flying alone for the first time, he was a little anxious. But unlike most, Malik had learned long ago how to hide nervousness. It was a skill sharpened by necessity, not comfort. Beneath his seat, tucked into his beat-up canvas backpack, was a thick notebook wrapped in duct tape. It looked like trash, but inside were pages filled with hand-drawn emergency protocols, medical sketches, CPR steps, and handwritten notes painstakingly copied from books and YouTube tutorials over the past 3 years. He called it the manual. His mother, Cynthia, used to tease him gently about it. "Baby, if there's ever an apocalypse, I'm sticking with you," she'd said once with a tired smile. She wasn't wrong. Malik wasn't much of a talker, but he was a learner. His mind absorbed like cloth in water. And when Aunt Miriam had died because help arrived 5 minutes too late, Malik decided 5 minutes would never be the reason he lost someone again. So he taught himself what to do in those 5 minutes. Now, 30,000 feet in the air. He glanced down the aisle. A man in a dark jacket stood silently near row 10I scanning. Malik recognized the way his gaze swept left, then right. Shoulders rigid, he was alert, but pretending not to be. An air marshal. He was sure of it. Malik's fingers moved subconsciously over the ridges of the duct tape binding his journal. He memorized faces quickly. It was another thing he picked up from growing up in a part of Chattanooga where watching people could mean survival. Suddenly, there was a cough, not the dry airplane kind. A wet, choking sound. It came from the front. People looked up. The man in the dark jacket, Agent Ron Callahan, staggered back 1 step, then collapsed forward into the aisle. His body hit the floor with a loud, unnatural thud. Tray tables clattered. A baby began to cry. Malik was already out of his seat. "Hey, sit down!" Kid a man's voice snapped from across the aisle, but Malik didn't hear it. He moved with eerie calmness, slid past the woman beside him, ducked under the flight attendant's outstretched arms, and dropped to his knees next to the agent's body. Blood foamed at the edges of Ron Callahan's mouth. His skin was pale, lips bluish. His limbs twitched. Poison. Malik had read enough to recognize the signs. From behind him, a stewardess, Avery Brooks, called for the med kit. She reached for the oxygen mask with shaky hands. "No," Malik said, voice steady. "He's not breathing on his own. He needs chest compressions. And if he was poisoned, we need to tilt his head to keep his airway clear." Avery froze. Malik didn't wait. He positioned his hands, interlocked his fingers, and began compressions. He counted softly under his breath, ignoring the murmurs, the stares, and the phone cameras now pointed at him. "Come on, sir," he whispered. "Don't quit now." The agent gasped. Once, then again. A small wheeze followed. "He's responding," Malik said, more to himself than anyone else. He turned his head to Avery. "I need gloves, alcohol wipes. Something's on his jacket, maybe a residue." Someone behind him shouted, "Why is that kid touching him?" Another said, "Is he the one who did it? Logan Pierce, a man in first class with a pressed white shirt and watch that screamed money," stood up and pointed toward Malik. "This is suspicious," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't know this kid. He was the first one at the scene. This could be part of something bigger." Malik didn't react. He kept his hands moving. He knew how this worked. A black teenager on a plane. An unconscious white man, a growing crowd. Fear was quick, and it never asked for both sides. By the time the medical team met them on landing, Ron Callahan was conscious, groggy, but stable. Malik moved back silently, wiped his hands with a napkin, and returned to his seat. But his relief was short-lived. As the passengers began applauding their gratitude, awkwardly redirected two officers boarded. They walked past everyone and stopped at Malik. "Son," one of them said, too calmly, "we're going to need you to come with us." Someone behind them whispered, "I knew it." Malik said nothing. He glanced at Avery, who looked horrified. Then he took a breath, reached down, picked up his backpack. He held the manual to his chest like armor, and followed the men down the aisle. The fluorescent lights in Gate 7's security room buzzed faintly, casting a bluish hue over the white-tiled floor. The silence inside was louder than the chaos outside the one-way glass window. Passengers streamed by with luggage and coffee cups, never imagining what was happening just a few feet away. Malik Grant sat on a cold metal chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his backpack tucked beneath his feet. His eyes didn't dart around, he didn't fidget, but inside, a quiet war was beginning. He had done everything right. He had saved a man's life. He had followed the steps he practiced over and over in his bedroom with a pillow for a patient and a stopwatch on his nightstand. Yet here he was, alone, questioned, suspected. Across from him sat two officers, not airport security guards, real federal agents. They hadn't read him his rights. They hadn't let him call his mom. They hadn't offered him water. The older of the two leaned forward, arms on the table. "So, Malik," he said, drawing out the name, "you want to tell us what you were doing when Agent Callahan collapsed?" Malik looked up slowly. His voice, when it came, was soft and even. "I saw he needed help. I've studied emergency medicine since I was 13. He wasn't breathing. I acted." The younger agent, whose name tag read J. Travers, scoffed quietly. "You just happened to be there, knew exactly what to do. Pretty convenient." Malik's jaw tightened. It wasn't convenient. It was necessary. A silence fell between them. The older agent tapped his pen on the table. "Where did you learn how to do that kind of work? You've been in trouble before." Malik didn't answer that. Instead, he reached down, slowly, and slid the duct-taped notebook from his backpack. He laid it gently on the table. "This," he said, "is where I learned." The agent flipped it open, his face shifting as he saw the meticulously labeled drawings, the CPR charts, the diagrams of heart anatomy, the handwritten notes, color-coded and full of red check marks. There were even pages marked with dates, some over 3 years old. "What kind of 16-year-old writes this?" the agent muttered. "One who didn't want to lose anyone else?" Malik replied quietly. The younger agent glanced at his partner. "Still doesn't explain why you moved so fast, or why there was residue on Callahan's jacket, or why no one else saw you until you were already at his side." "I moved fast because he was dying," Malik said. "And I saw something on his collar. It looked like powder." I told the flight attendant. She didn't mention that in her initial statement, the older agent said sharply. Malik blinked. Then she was overwhelmed. Or scared. That doesn't make it less true. They stared at him for a long moment. Then the door opened. A woman stepped in. Tall, red heels, business suit, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other, TSA badge clipped to her jacket. Her name was Lorraine Beck. "I'll take it from here," she said, voice cool and professional. The agent stood but didn't look pleased. "Ma'am, this is a sensitive matter." One started. "I'm well aware," Lorraine interrupted, "but unless you have probable cause, a warrant, or parental consent, you're unlawfully detaining a minor." They hesitated. She arched one brow. "Now." With reluctant nods, the agents gathered their folders and stepped out. The moment the door closed, Lorraine sat across from Malik. "I'm not here to intimidate you," she said gently. "I'm here because someone in that cabin called her brother, and her brother is a constitutional lawyer in D.C. Malik's eyes widened just a little. "Avery, flight attendant. Right. She's shaken up. But she's clear on one thing: you saved that man's life." Lorraine took a long breath, her voice lowering. That should have been the headline. But instead, someone in first class live-streamed a clip of you kneeling over Agent Callahan with the words "suspicious activity" on it. Malik felt the heat rise behind his eyes. "They're calling me a terrorist, aren't they?" Lorraine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence told him everything. She leaned forward. "Malik, I need you to stay calm, but honest with me. Did you ever meet Agent Callahan before today?" "No." "Have you ever handled weapons, explosives, or toxins?" "No." "Have you had any training, formal, unofficial, military, anything?" "No, ma'am. Just books, videos, practice." Lorraine studied him. Not his skin, not his clothes, his eyes. "You're calm for a kid in here." Malik shrugged. "I had to learn early how to stay calm when people misjudge me." That stopped her. He looked down at the table, at his hands. "I wasn't scared when I saw him collapse. I wasn't even scared when the guy in first class accused me. But I got scared when they took my backpack. I thought they'd rip it up. I worked 3 summers just to buy the books I used to make that manual. It's all I've got." Lorraine's voice softened. "It's safe. I promise." Malik nodded, but didn't smile. He couldn't. Not yet. A soft knock on the door. It cracked open. One of the airport staff whispered something to Lorraine. Her eyes lit up. "Your mom is here." For a moment, Malik's breath caught in his throat. Then the door opened wider, and Cynthia Grant stepped in. Her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her shoes mismatched, her purse nearly falling off her shoulder. "Malik," she gasped. He stood, and she was on him in seconds, wrapping him in the kind of hug that makes you forget every awful thing in the world for a few heartbeats. "Oh, baby, I've been calling everywhere. They wouldn't tell me where you were. I'm okay." "Mom," he said, "I'm really okay." Lorraine watched quietly, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her face. Finally, she stood. "Ms. Grant, your son is free to go for now, but I want you to know that there will likely be follow-up questions. The situation is evolving." Cynthia nodded. "Then we'll answer them. Together." Malik looked at Lorraine. "Is Agent Callahan awake? He is in stable condition, but he hasn't spoken much yet. Does he know I helped him?" Lorraine smiled softly. "I think he does." As they left the room, Malik glanced back at the table where his journal had sat, where his character had been silently dissected. He didn't know yet what the world would say tomorrow, but something had changed. In him, Around him, he just didn't know how big it was. Yet. By morning, the video had already been viewed 5 million times. The frame was grainy, taken from a phone tilted sideways in first class, but the caption blazed like wildfire across every platform. Black teen seen kneeling over downed Air Marshal mid-flight. Is this domestic terrorism? No context, no sound, just Malik's silhouette, hands pressed to Agent Callahan's chest. Sweat glistening on his forehead as he performed CPR. It looked like control. It looked like strategy. And to those already afraid of young black bodies in confined public spaces, it looked like intent. Within hours, hashtags exploded. Flight 2187, mid-air incident, suspicious, teen protect our skies. A blurry moment had become a digital monster, and the truth lay buried beneath the scroll. Malik sat on the edge of the hotel bed next to his mom, still in yesterday's clothes. His phone vibrated nonstop. Messages from classmates, teachers, his former coach, his AP biology tutor. But none of them were asking if he was okay. They wanted to know if it was real, if it was true. Cynthia sat beside him, one hand on his back, rubbing slow, clockwise circles. Her own phone was on the nightstand, screen cracked from when she'd dropped it at the airport. "You don't have to explain yourself to the internet," she whispered. Malik looked up at her. "But what if I have to explain myself to the police?" Before Cynthia could answer, there was a knock on the door. It was Lorraine Beck again. This time in plain clothes, hair pulled back in a soft braid, holding a paper coffee tray and a small white envelope. "Didn't want to spook you," she said gently, "but I figured I owed you both a heads up." She handed the envelope to Cynthia. Inside was a formal subpoena. Malik was to appear before a federal investigative committee within 72 hours. Cynthia's hand trembled. "This is insane," she said. "He's a minor. He saved a man's life." Lorraine nodded. "I know. And if I could stop it, I would." But the narrative's already spiraling. A senator from Missouri tweeted the clip with a call for stricter airline screenings, and Foxfire Media is calling Malik a lone wolf. It's ugly. Malik swallowed. "What about Agent Callahan? Has he said anything?" Lorraine hesitated. "He regained full consciousness this morning. He asked who revived him. When I said your name, he paused, said he didn't remember, that it was all a blur." Malik nodded slowly, which means he's scared, or being told to stay quiet. Lorraine didn't confirm, but she didn't deny it either. She set the coffee tray down. "There's more," she said quietly. "Logan Pierce, the man who filmed the video. He's the CEO of Stratton Aerospace, private government contractor, big political donor." Malik blinked, so he knew exactly what posting that video would do. Lorraine sighed. "Pretty much. And now he's using it to push for congressional hearings on youth radicalization." Cynthia stood, fists clenched. "You've got to be kidding me. My son is 16. He still sleeps with his old CPR bear when he's anxious. He couldn't radicalize a nap." Lorraine offered a small smile. "I believe you. But truth doesn't move as fast as fear." She turned to Malik. "There's going to be a press conference this afternoon. The airline is trying to get ahead of the storm. They've asked if you'd attend. Speak for 2 minutes. Keep it simple. No politics, just reassurance." Malik frowned. "So they want me to look harmless." "Yes," Lorraine said, "because that's the only language some people understand right now." He didn't answer right away. He stared out the window of the hotel room, clouds rolling in, planes rising above them, oblivious to the mess below. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I'm not going to lie." Lorraine nodded. "That's fair." That afternoon, The hotel's conference room buzzed with reporters, camera crews, flashing lights, whispered arguments, rumors, threats, all beneath the hum of air conditioning and the hollow clatter of plastic name placards. When Malik stepped onto the small platform, a wave of silence fell. He was wearing his only collared shirt, the one he'd worn to his middle school science fair when he built a model of the human heart. Cynthia had pressed it that morning, tears in her eyes, hands shaking. Now it hung loose on his growing shoulders. He looked out at the sea of faces. Then he spoke. "My name is Malik Grant. I'm 16 years old. I live in Chicago. My mom is a nurse. I'm not a terrorist. I'm not part of any group. I'm not radical. I'm not dangerous." He paused. "What I am is prepared." He reached into his backpack, now returned, and held up his notebook. "This is my life's work. Every diagram, every note, every emergency procedure. Because I've always believed that when something goes wrong, you don't freeze. You act. You help." He looked down for a moment. "When I saw that man collapse, I didn't think about his badge or what might happen. I thought about his heartbeat and whether he'd get to see his family again." He looked up, his voice steady. "If you think that makes me suspicious, then maybe it's not me you should be afraid of." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then one reporter clapped, another, and then the room filled with applause. But not all headlines would be kind. By evening, the split had hardened. Social media had become a battleground. While Malik the medic trended alongside Teen Threat on Flight 1807, some called him a hero, others called him a fraud. The truth was buried somewhere in between. That night, Malik sat on the hotel balcony. Cynthia was inside on the phone with his uncle. Lorraine had left. The city lights below blinked like questions. He scrolled through his mentions, saw strangers defending him, others mocking his voice, threats, support, fan art, memes. It was surreal, unreal. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like a boy who had done something right and was now being punished for it. A small voice in the back of his mind whispered something darker. Maybe I should have just stayed in my seat. But he shook it off. No. If he had stayed in his seat, Agent Callahan would be dead. And that was not a trade he could live with. Inside, his mother called for him. "Bedtime. Tomorrow's going to be heavier." He stood, slipping his phone into his pocket, and looked one last time at the city. Let them talk. He had more to do. The first thing Agent Callahan saw when he opened his eyes was the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. They flickered faintly overhead, humming with that sterile buzz he'd learned to ignore in federal hallways. But now it pierced his ears like static. His chest ached, his ribs burned, and for a moment he didn't know where he was. The rhythm of his breathing felt unnatural. Oxygen tube, IV drip, cardiac monitor, hospital. Memory returned in fragments. The flight, the turbulence, the sudden tightness in his chest. Then the heat collapsing his vision, and then darkness. When he tried to sit up, a firm but gentle hand rested on his shoulder. "Easy," said the nurse. "You coded for a full 45 seconds. Your heart stopped, sir." Callahan blinked. "What?" "You went into cardiac arrest, mid-flight. Luckily, someone was there. Someone." Images flickered behind his eyes again. A boy's voice, frantic, focused, pressure on his chest. Repetition. A steady hand keeping him anchored in life. But the face, the name, it was all fog. Who, he asked. The nurse hesitated. Malik Grant, teenager, passenger in seat 21C. The name didn't trigger recognition, but the nurse's tone did. She seemed both proud and cautious. Callahan cleared his throat. "Where is he now?" "He was detained briefly," the nurse said carefully. "Released later." There's a lot happening on the news. Callahan narrowed his eyes. Why was he detained? The nurse didn't answer directly. I'll let your superior brief you, sir, but for what it's worth, that boy saved your life. Hours later, Callahan was discharged into a waiting black SUV. Inside, Supervisory Agent Leland Morse sat with an iPad in his lap, his mouth a flat line. Callahan slid in beside him. You look like hell, Morse said flatly. I feel like hell, Callahan replied. Morse turned the screen toward him. The now viral video played once more. That boy, hovering over him, applying compressions with rhythmic precision, sweat dotting his forehead. Flight attendants in the background, stunned. One man filming from the aisle. His name's everywhere, Morse muttered, some calling him a hero, some calling him a suspect. Stratton Aerospace is fanning the flames. Callahan squinted at the screen. He's 16, he said. He saved my life? Morse didn't flinch. And in the court of public opinion, facts matter less than framing. I need to talk to him. Morse shook his head. No. Why? Because the optics are already spinning out of control. You waking up and immediately defending him only adds fuel. It makes it look like we're backpedaling, like he's controlling the narrative. Callahan scoffed. He's a kid, not a PR firm. Morse raised an eyebrow. Be that as it may, the Bureau's priority right now is de-escalation. We're reviewing all internal flight logs, camera feeds, social media content. Meanwhile, you're being advised to limit statements. Callahan leaned back in the seat. Silence thick around them. He felt it in his bones, the creeping discomfort of a system more concerned with perception than truth. It was a language he'd learned too well during his 20 years of service. Protect the institution. Control the damage. Forget the human cost. But this was different. This was personal. That night, while Morse stepped out to take a call, Callahan pulled up his own tablet and searched Malik Grant. The page flooded with images. Photos of the boy's speech, screen grabs of his medical notebook, debates, memes, hate, support, racism dressed as commentary. Then a photo stopped him. Malik and his mother sitting together on a hotel room couch. Cynthia's eyes were tired but proud. Her arm was wrapped around her son's shoulders like armor. He zoomed in on Malik's face. There was something in the boy's expression. Not anger, not fear, conviction. Callahan clicked through and found the full video of the incident, captured by an overhead security camera. No sound, but no need for it. He watched as Malik checked the pulse, started compressions, paused to stabilize the head tilt, lifted for breath, repeated, efficient, correct. By the book. Better than some junior medics he'd seen in training. He kept watching, long after the video ended. He didn't notice Lorraine Beck step into the room. I thought you'd be here, she said softly. Callahan looked up. You met him, didn't you? Lorraine nodded. Twice. What's your read? She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. He's brilliant, scared, but grounded. His mom raised him right, and he's hurting because people keep treating him like a threat for doing what none of us could. Callahan winced at the truth of it. I should have remembered his face, or thanked him. Lorraine smiled faintly. He doesn't need a thank you. He needs someone with authority to stand beside him. There was silence between them. Let me talk to him, Callahan said finally. Lorraine hesitated, against Bureau protocol. Callahan nodded slowly, but maybe in a different capacity. She narrowed her eyes. Meaning. I'm not just a federal agent. I'm a father. I've got 2 kids. One of them's exactly Malik's age. And if my son saved a stranger's life and got arrested for it, I'd want someone to make it right. Lorraine watched him. Then she handed him a folded piece of paper, a contact number. Cynthia's direct line. She doesn't trust many people right now. Don't make it worse. That night, as city lights blinked like nerves in the dark, Agent Callahan sat alone with his phone. He stared at the number. He remembered the blur of Malik's hands pressing into his sternum, the sharp pain that meant life returning. The moment breath found him again. He took a deep breath. Then he dialed. It rang once, twice. Then, hello, Cynthia's voice, cautious. Mrs. Grant. This is Agent Callahan. A pause. Then you're awake. I am. Thanks to your son. Another pause. I figured. He hasn't slept. Keeps thinking they're going to arrest him again. Callahan's throat tightened. They shouldn't have in the first place. Cynthia didn't speak for a moment. Then, gently, so, why are you calling? Callahan looked out at the window. Because I want to meet him. Not in a courtroom, not in a press conference, just to say thank you. And to listen. There was a long silence on the other end. Then came the softest reply. Okay. And in that moment, something shifted. A ripple in the tide of headlines. A hand reaching back. The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner of the city, the kind of place where businessmen met in silence and worn-down mothers cradled lattes like lifelines. No cameras, no microphones, no clickbait headlines, just the smell of cinnamon and espresso and the soft hum of a world moving too fast outside. Malik sat at the corner table, his hands clasped around a lukewarm cocoa. He stared out the window without really looking. The seat across from him remained empty, though his mother sat one table away, her protective instincts visible in the way she held her coat tightly against her chest, eyes locked on every entrance. When the door opened, Malik didn't flinch, but Cynthia straightened. Agent Callahan stepped inside, no badge in sight, dressed in a plain navy jacket and jeans. The limp in his gait was subtle, but Malik noticed. So did the pause in his breath, the slight wince. The man had just come back from the edge of death. And yet, here he was. No security detail, no media handler, no bureau backdrop. He was just a man. Callahan walked over and stood in front of the table for a second before Malik gestured slightly to the chair across from him. You remembered, Malik said quietly. Callahan nodded as he sat. I told you I would. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe forming a protective wall around them. Then Malik spoke again. I didn't think you'd call. I had to, Callahan replied. You saved my life. Malik gave a half shrug. Did what I was trained to do. Callahan tilted his head. Who trained you? Malik glanced at his cocoa. Books. Internet. EMT forums. I watch trauma response videos in my spare time. My mom says I have the weirdest idea of fun. Callahan chuckled softly, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. Do you know what you did was textbook perfect? I know what should have happened after wasn't. Callahan leaned forward. They shouldn't have arrested you. I've watched the footage. Read the reports. There was no threat. You weren't the problem. I know, Malik said, voice flat. But that's not how it felt. Malik looked up. His eyes, tired for someone so young, didn't blink. It felt like I was dangerous, like the moment I put my hands on you, I crossed some invisible line. I kept thinking, if I looked different, if I was older, would they have listened? Callahan looked down at his coffee, letting the weight of Malik's words settle. I can't change what happened, he said finally, but I can make sure your story is heard. All of it. I don't need people to hear my story, Malik replied. I need them to stop writing false ones. Cynthia approached then, her voice calm but steady. He's had reporters waiting outside our building, strangers online calling him a terrorist, A fake, even a plant, and all because he tried to save someone's life. Callahan nodded slowly. That someone was me, which is why I'm here. He turned to Malik again. I want to offer something, not because I owe you, which I do, but because I believe you deserve it. Malik raised an eyebrow. What kind of offer? An internship, Callahan said. Not a favor. A path. The Bureau has an Explorer's Initiative, a mentorship track for teens with law enforcement or medical interests. It's hard to get into, but I can sponsor you. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. And what does he have to trade in return? Callahan shook his head. Nothing. Just his time, his drive, his voice. Malik was quiet for a long time. Then he said, if I say yes, does that make all this go away? The arrests, the stares, the silence in the hallway at school. Nora Callahan admitted, but it gives you access and a seat at the table. That's where change starts. Malik studied him. Why does this matter to you so much? Callahan hesitated, then reached into his jacket. He pulled out an old photograph and slid it across the table. It showed a younger Callahan in uniform, arm around a boy not much older than Malik. A boy with brown skin, dimples, and eyes full of fire. My son, Marcus, Callahan said. He died in a car accident when he was 18. We used to argue constantly. Politics, race, policing. He wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, said the system didn't protect kids like him. Callahan paused. He was right, and I never told him I agreed until it was too late. Malik looked down at the photo, then back up at the man who'd lived with that silence. You see him in me. I see the kind of man he was becoming. Someone who spoke truth, even when it cost him. Callahan leaned forward. You're not just a headline, Malik. You're the future of this country, and I want to help build a world where that matters. Malik nodded slowly. His throat tightened. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. They stood then. Callahan extended his hand. This time, Malik didn't hesitate. He shook it. And for the first time since the flight, since the sirens, since the cuffs, and the fear and the silence, Malik felt something ease inside his chest. Not justice, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Malik didn't sleep the night after the meeting. He lay in bed with the curtains drawn tight, the city pulsing quietly through the window panes. His laptop sat shut on the floor, unread notifications blinking like a lighthouse in reverse warnings instead of guides. The headlines had spread like wildfire. Black teen who saved federal agent, now under FBI investigation. Hero or threat America. Reacts to mid-air incident. Who is Malik Grant? Each one seemed more detached from the truth than the last. They didn't talk about his trembling hands as he tried to stop Callahan's bleeding. They didn't mention the kindness in his voice when calming the frightened passenger beside him. They didn't quote the Air Marshal's recovery report. Instead, they questioned, interrogated, speculated. He got up before sunrise. Cynthia was already in the kitchen, sipping tea in silence. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew the answer was complicated. Over breakfast, Malik said, I'm going to school. Cynthia looked up sharply. Are you sure I need to walk in that building with my head up, even if they don't look at me the same? She watched him carefully. You shouldn't have to be brave for other people's fear. Malik smiled faintly. Maybe not. But if I'm not, who else will they rode the subway together, side by side, the way they had since Malik was in 6th grade? She used to hold his hand. Now she just held space. Outside the school gates, students were gathered. Some stared, some pointed. A few whispered his name like it was part of a conspiracy. He stepped through them, silent but tall, shoulders back, eyes steady. He didn't flinch, not even when someone muttered the word staged. He knew what they thought, that he was some kind of attention seeker, that the whole thing was exaggerated, that a 15-year-old couldn't possibly have done what the reports claimed, but he had. And if they couldn't accept that truth, it wasn't his job to shrink himself for their comfort. Inside, things were quieter. His chemistry teacher paused mid-sentence when he walked in. The janitor gave him a solemn nod. His best friend, Zoe, slid a granola bar across the table at lunch and didn't say a word. He appreciated the silence more than he'd expected. Still, the tension was thick, unspoken, like the air itself had turned judgmental. He wasn't just Malik anymore. He was Malik Grant, the boy from the plane. During his free period, the school counselor called him in. Ms. Patel was kind, always had been, but her eyes were cautious now. "I just want to check in," she said, folding her hands over a neat stack of printed articles. "You've been through something intense. It's okay to talk." "I'm fine," he replied. "Are you?" Though he hesitated, then said, "I did the right thing, Ms. Patel. I know that, but somehow it's like the world needs me to apologize for it, Ms." Patel nodded slowly. Sometimes the world doesn't know what to do with a young black man who doesn't fit the mold it built for him. Malik looked up. Her words hit harder than expected. "What if I don't want to fit any mold? Then you break it." She let the silence sit for a moment. "I read what the agent said about you," she added gently. "He called you decisive, calm under pressure, empathetic. Those aren't just skills. Those are gifts." Malik blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity. He stood, voice softer now. "Thank you." When he walked out, he saw the news crew waiting just beyond the school gates. A woman with perfectly curled hair and a microphone too bright for daylight smiled at him like they were old friends. "Malik, just one question." He didn't stop walking. Another reporter tried to follow. "Is it true you were placed on a watch list before the flight?" He kept going. The whispers turned to shouts, but Malik said nothing. That evening, the knocks at the door didn't come from the press. It was the mailman, unusually flustered, with 2 certified envelopes from the Department of Justice. Cynthia opened them while Malik stood nearby. One was an official notice Malik Grant was now part of an active federal inquiry, not under arrest, but under review. The second was stranger. A subpoena, not for Malik, but for the passenger in seat 14C, the one who had filmed the incident on their phone. Cynthia's jaw clenched. They're trying to build a case either way. Malik said nothing, but inside, his chest buzzed with questions. What was the case? That he acted too fast, that his skin made his competence suspicious, that his calm under pressure was rehearsed instead of earned. He knew now this was bigger than one flight, bigger than one boy. It was about fear. Fear of black boys who didn't play scared. Fear of excellence when it came from the wrong zip code. That night, while the city hummed and the headlines kept spinning, Malik pulled out his journal and wrote 5 words he hadn't allowed himself to think until now. What if they ruin me? Not kill him. Not jail him. Just ruin him. Twist the narrative until his name was no longer his own. Make people see a threat instead of a heartbeat. He closed the journal quietly. The next morning, he went to see Zoe. She lived 4 blocks down, her father a retired nurse, her mother a librarian. Their house always smelled like peppermint and old paperbacks. Zoe opened the door before he knocked. "You okay?" she asked. "Not really." She nodded and stepped aside. They sat on the floor of her room, surrounded by throw pillows and open textbooks. "I keep thinking," Malik said slowly. "What if I hadn't moved? What if I froze? Callahan would have died. And I wouldn't be. This. A headline. A threat. Zoe looked at him. You were right, Malik. That matters, even if they pretend it doesn't. He met her eyes. You ever feel like truth isn't enough anymore? She smiled, sad but certain. That's why we need to keep telling it louder. He exhaled. Then I need to speak. Not just once. Not just for me. She reached for his hand. I'll be right there when you do. Outside her window. The city didn't pause. But for a moment, Malik felt like he could. The next day, he wrote his statement. Not to the media, not to the bureau, but to the people. He titled it, I was just trying to save a life. And for the first time since the sky fell around him, he felt steady again. The federal building downtown was colder than Malik expected. Not just the air conditioning, but the tone. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the waiting room walls were the color of forgotten paper, off-white and indifferent. Malik sat between Cynthia and a pro bono lawyer named Marissa Chen, whose calm demeanor felt like armor. He hadn't spoken much that morning. The words he rehearsed in front of the mirror evaporated the moment he stepped into the building. They were here for a voluntary hearing, but nothing about it felt voluntary. Cynthia reached over and squeezed his knee. It wasn't just comfort, it was transfer. Strength passed from mother to son, a silent vow that whatever came next, he wasn't walking in alone. They were called into a long conference room that didn't smell like justice. It smelled like stress, ink, and old coffee. 3 people sat at the far end, a Homeland Security representative, a Department of Transportation official, and a legal aide from the Bureau of Aviation Safety. Not one of them smiled. As Malik sat, he noticed something. No photos on the wall, no flags, no attempt at warmth, just a recorder blinking red in the center of the table, blinking as if to say everything you say can and will be held against you, depending on how we choose to hear it. Marissa leaned in. Answer honestly. Don't volunteer what they don't ask. And breathe. Malik. He nodded, throat dry. The first question was technical. Mr. Grant, can you confirm the sequence of events that took place on Regalis Flight 2178? Malik inhaled. Yes. About an hour into the flight, there was a loud thud near the back galley. A man collapsed. There was shouting. I stood up and walked over. I saw blood. He was bleeding from his leg. The crew didn't move. I asked for gauze. No one responded. So You approached the man? Yes. Knowing he had a firearm, I didn't know who he was. I just saw that he was hurt. The official nodded, writing something. Another asked, You said the crew didn't respond. Did you feel your actions were necessary due to negligence on their part? Malik's heart picked up. He wasn't here to throw flight attendants under the bus. No. I think they were in shock. People panic in different ways. I just did what I hoped someone would do if it were my uncle or my mom. Interesting, the dot rep said. And the syringe. Why did you inject the Marshal? Malik glanced at Marissa. I didn't inject him, he said carefully. I handed it to the woman in seat 14C. She was a nurse. She asked me to stabilize his leg so she could give him epinephrine. His pulse was dropping. We worked together. The panel exchanged looks. One scribbled furiously. The silence dragged, long enough to feel orchestrated. Then came the question Malik had been dreading. Did you access or alter any onboard systems using your device? He blinked. What, your tablet? You had it out during the incident. It was off. I only used it after to check on news updates once we landed. I didn't touch any aircraft systems. Are you aware that your name was flagged in a predictive security sweep last month? Malik's throat tightened. No, he said. Flagged for what? No answer. Just scribbles. Marissa cleared her throat. My client is not under formal investigation. These implications border on character defamation unless substantiated. No one replied. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes. Technical terms, flight codes, eye contact that felt like combat. Malik kept his posture straight, even as his insides curled. When they were dismissed, the walk back to the lobby felt like a descent. In the elevator, Malik finally spoke. They didn't care what I said. Marissa sighed. They didn't, but now they can't say they didn't hear it. Cynthia wrapped her arm around his shoulders. Outside, the press waited. Malik didn't stop. He didn't pose. He didn't shout. He just walked. That evening, a video leaked. The footage from Seat 14C had somehow surfaced online, unedited, uncut. It showed the moment Callahan collapsed, the panic, the hesitation, and then it showed Malik, calm, direct, compassionate. The nurse's voice came through, trembling. Hold his leg here, tight. Thank you, baby. Good job. You're doing good. The clip ended with the moment Callahan gripped Malik's wrist and mouthed two words, thank you. Within hours, everything changed. The media reframed their narrative. Teen hero or national threat became young man's courage saves federal officer. Suddenly, people remembered what mattered. The hashtag shifted, or Malik Grant trended globally. But this time, not with suspicion, with admiration. Someone called him the calm in the cabin. Another wrote, he reminded us what humanity looks like at 30,000 feet. But Malik didn't celebrate. He sat in the corner of his room that night, staring at the screen, watching strangers debate his character. Zoe called. You see the shift. Yeah, you okay? He hesitated. I should be happy. Right, are you? He looked down. I'm tired. Zoe, I saved a man's life and nearly lost my own in the process, and I'm supposed to be grateful they're not calling me a terrorist anymore. Zoe was quiet for a long moment. You don't owe anyone your gratitude. You already gave more than you should have had to. Malik exhaled slowly. They only believe me now because someone filmed it. I know. What if they hadn't? She didn't answer, because they both knew. The next day, Callahan himself released a statement. It read simply, I owe my life to Malik Grant. I didn't know his name when I passed out, but I felt his hands, steady, unafraid. I was bleeding out, and he stopped it. Without him, I wouldn't have seen my daughter again. I wasn't just saved by a bystander. I was saved by a leader, an American, period. That was the first time Malik cried since the plane. Not in shame, but in release. Tears ran hot down his cheeks as he whispered, finally. Cynthia walked in, saw him, and didn't speak. She just sat beside him, pulled his head to her shoulder, and let him be a kid again for just a little while. The next morning, the hearing board rescinded its inquiry. Malik's record was cleared, but his life wasn't going back to normal. He knew that now. Once the world sees you as a threat, it takes more than truth to undo the stain. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't naive anymore either. At dinner, Cynthia asked him if he wanted to go away for a bit. Visit family in Georgia. Clear his head. Malik shook his head. I don't want to run from this. She gave a soft smile. Then, what do you want? He thought for a long time. I want to speak, not just about what happened, but why it almost didn't matter. I want to talk about the silence before the apology, the doubt before the belief. She nodded. Then you're ready. The boy on the plane was gone. In his place stood a young man who knew his name meant something now, and he wasn't about to let anyone else write the rest of the story. The morning Malik was scheduled to appear on national television. The world outside his window was quiet. too quiet for a city still reeling from what had happened in the air just days before. He sat at the edge of the hotel bed, wearing the navy blue suit his mother had pressed 3 times. It was too crisp, too formal for how he felt. Cynthia stood behind him, adjusting his collar. She didn't speak until he looked at himself in the mirror and whispered, "Do I look like someone they'll listen to?" She replied, "You look like someone who doesn't need their permission anymore." The producers of Sunrise Today had flown Malik and Cynthia to New York for a live segment. The email had read like an invitation, but Malik couldn't shake the feeling that it was just a softer interrogation, this time with lights and commercial breaks. When they entered the studio, the brightness was blinding. Everything was glass, chrome, and smiles. The hosts were warm, too warm, the kind of warmth that came from years of pretending to care for the camera. They ushered Malik to the makeup chair, powdered his face, adjusted his mic, and handed him a list of questions. But Malik had brought something of his own. As they counted down to air, he could feel his pulse in his fingertips. He remembered the rush of blood on the plane, the silence from the flight attendants, the weight of Callahan's blood on his palms, the confusion, the whispers, the looks. Now, here he was, on a couch with perfect lighting and a mug with the show's logo on it. And we're live in 3, 2. The host smiled. "Good morning, America. Today we're joined by the brave young man whose actions aboard Regalis Flight 2178 may have saved the life of an air marshal, 17-year-old Malik Grant." "Malik, thank you for being here." Malik nodded. "Thank you for having me." The other host leaned in. "Malik, take us back to that moment. When you stood up from your seat, what were you thinking?" Malik took a breath. "I wasn't thinking. I was reacting. I saw someone bleeding. I moved." The host smiled. "And you weren't afraid." "Of course I was, but I was more afraid of doing nothing." The segment continued. They showed a short clip of the incident, cropped carefully to remove the chaos. It made everything look cleaner than it was. Easier. Then the host turned to the camera. What many people don't know is that Malik was also flagged by predictive systems just weeks before the incident. Yet here he is, a hero. Malik, how does that feel? That word again, hero. Malik sat up straighter. "Before I answer that, may I ask you a question?" The hosts blinked. The producers in the control room panicked quietly behind the glass, gesturing, waving. "Sure," one said. Malik turned slightly to face them. "How many black teenagers do you think were flagged last month for simply existing in systems that were never built to understand them?" A pause. Thick. Charged. "I was flagged by an algorithm. Not because I did anything wrong, but because someone programmed it to see me as a risk. And when I tried to help someone, that label nearly got me arrested instead of thanked. So when you ask me how it feels to be called a hero, I have to say it feels confusing. Because if there hadn't been a video, you wouldn't be interviewing me. You'd be debating whether I should be banned from flying." Silence. Cynthia, just off camera, held her breath. Malik continued. "This isn't just about me. There are thousands of kids like me who won't get a camera, or a lawyer, or a public apology. What happened to me happens quietly to them every day. On trains, in classrooms, in stores, in their own neighborhoods." The hosts looked stunned. One shuffled her cue cards, but "Malik," she tried, "surely we've made progress." He smiled softly, without humor. "Progress is not the same thing as justice, and I don't want to be the exception that makes people comfortable. I want to be the reason they look closer at the rule." A beat passed, then another, and then the producer gave a signal. They cut to commercial. Backstage, no one said much. The hosts thanked him, but their smiles were dimmer, not angry, just uncertain. Malik wasn't the story they'd expected. He was deeper, sharper, unapologetic. He and Cynthia returned to the hotel in a black car with tinted windows and a driver who didn't ask questions. Malik leaned his head against the window, watching the skyline blur. "What if I said too much?" he asked. "You said exactly enough," Cynthia answered. "You didn't go there to be liked. You went there to be heard." Later that night, Zoe texted a single line. "You shook the room." Then came a call from Marissa Chen. "Malik," she said, "the mayor's office just reached out. They want you to speak at the youth summit next month." Your words hit harder than they expected. Malik looked at his reflection in the window. Not a boy, not quite a man, but something forged between fire and grace. "I'll do it," he said, and as he hung up, he whispered to himself, "But I'm bringing my own questions." That night, Cynthia found him sitting in the hotel hallway, notebook in hand. "What are you doing out here?" "Writing. I couldn't sleep." She sat beside him. "What are you writing?" He handed it to her. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "What does safety mean when it only belongs to some?" She blinked. "You're writing a speech already." "No," Malik said. "I'm writing a future, one where I don't have to keep explaining my worth to people." She looked at her son, and for the first time in days, she smiled fully. Then, write loud, "Baby," and make them read every word. Malik nodded, and somewhere in the city, behind closed boardroom doors, executives were drafting new protocols. Internal review panels were suddenly awake. People were watching, listening, and in some places, quietly afraid. Because Malik Grant wasn't just a passenger anymore, he had become a question they couldn't answer, and a truth they could no longer ignore. 2 days after the interview, Malik sat on Flight 324 back to San Francisco. This time, he flew in first class, not because the airline offered it, but because Marissa Chen insisted on it. "A small gesture of recognition," she said, "a public correction." But Malik didn't feel comforted by legroom or complimentary snacks. Luxury felt hollow when it came after suspicion. He adjusted his seatbelt and glanced out the window. Rain streaked across the glass like someone had been crying on the sky itself. Cynthia had taken the seat beside him, but had already dozed off, her hand resting gently over his wrist. Her warmth grounded him. A flight attendant walked by and offered Malik a smile. It was polite, not performative. Still, he watched her walk away with guarded eyes. Then something caught his attention. Tucked deep in the seat back pocket in front of him, nearly invisible, was a folded piece of paper. At first he thought it was a forgotten receipt or a child's doodle, but when he reached for it and unfolded the page, he froze. It was a letter, handwritten. On the top corner, it read, "To whoever sits here next, please read this." The handwriting was delicate but firm, not rushed, intimate in its honesty. Malik read, "My name is Ian Callahan. You don't know me, but if you're reading this, you're in the same seat where I nearly died. I was an air marshal on Flight 2178. I'm the one you may have seen in the news, but I'm not writing to talk about my injury. I'm writing to talk about the boy who saved me. His name is Malik Grant, and I owe him more than my life. That boy risked everything to help me, even when people questioned his presence, his intention, his right to stand. In the brief moment I saw him, blood on his hands, eyes full of something I couldn't name. I felt ashamed, because I've worn a badge for 20 years. I've been trained to assess risk. And had I seen Malik walking down an alley at night before that flight, I probably would have felt fear instead of familiarity. That's not his failure. That's mine. That's the system's. If you're reading this, and you work in law enforcement, or you build algorithms, or you write policy, I'm begging you, stop pretending neutrality means justice. Because if Malik hadn't acted faster than protocol, I'd be dead. And the world would have just said, unfortunate situation. Wrong time, wrong place. We need to rewrite how we see people. We need to trust when someone's humanity shows up louder than our training. Thank you, Malik. You saved more than just me that day. Ian Callahan. Malik stared at the paper, eyes blurring, pulse thudding in his ears. He folded it carefully, like it was sacred, and slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Everything okay? Cynthia stirred. He nodded slowly. Yeah, just found something I didn't know I needed. The flight landed smoothly at SFO, but something inside Malik had shifted. He walked off that plane not as the boy who'd survived scrutiny, but as the young man holding proof that truth sometimes arrives when no one is looking. Marissa was waiting for them at the arrivals gate. I need you to read something, Malik said, before she could speak. They stood off to the side near a quiet bench. He handed her the letter. Marissa's eyes scanned the page, her lips tightening as she read. When she finished, she exhaled shakily. Do you understand what this is? She asked. A thank you. No, it's testimony. From a federal officer. One that could change everything. Malik sat beside her. Do you think it matters anymore? Marissa paused. It matters because it's rare. Because confession from the inside is almost unheard of. If we use this right, it's not just a narrative shift, it's leverage. Cynthia joined them. He didn't write it for a lawsuit. I know, Marissa said gently. But maybe it can protect the next kid before they need saving. That's worth something. They rode home in silence. Malik kept touching the letter inside his pocket like it was a heartbeat. That night, Malik sat at his desk with the letter open beside him. His laptop screen glowed with an empty document. He began to write not a speech, not a social post, just a letter back. Not to Ian, but to everyone, to whoever never got the chance to speak. I found a letter today. It wasn't written to me, but it was written for me. I've been called a hero. I've also been called a threat, sometimes in the same breath. I'm tired of existing between fear and admiration. I want to just exist, not as a lesson, not as a warning, not as a miracle. Just a boy, just a person. Maybe that's too much to ask, but I'm going to keep asking, because the moment we stop asking is the moment silence becomes permanent. And I've seen what silence does. Malik. He hit print, then folded the letter and tucked it beside Ian's. The next day, he would return to the airport. Not to fly, but to place the folded note gently back in that same seat back pocket on Flight 324. He hoped someone else would read it. Maybe they'd add one of their own. Maybe it would become a chain of truths, quiet, honest, unafraid. Maybe that's how revolutions really begin. Not with shouting, but with listening. The office was colder than Malik remembered, a sharp contrast from the heat rising in his chest. He sat in a small conference room inside Halcyon Systems, the company that designed the biometric security software used in major airports around the country. He hadn't come alone. Marissa sat beside him, her laptop open, fingers poised. Cynthia stood just behind, her presence quiet but steady. Across the table were 4 executives, a legal representative, and 1 data architect named Julian Roth. Julian looked tired, not defensive, but not open either. His body was folded in on itself the way people sit when they know what they built might be flawed. So let me get this straight. Malik began, voice calm. The system that scanned me didn't register my ID because... Julian cleared his throat. It flagged you as a potential impersonation threat. The facial scan matched your features but logged a behavior anomaly. Behavior anomaly, Malik repeated. You mean I looked nervous? In part, but also your decision to approach the crew mid-flight without authorization was logged as an escalation risk. That triggered a deeper scan. Marissa jumped in. And who decides what behavior counts as escalation? The machine. Julian hesitated. The machine only learns what we feed it. It learns from patterns. What kind of patterns? Cynthia asked. Julian took a breath. Historical ones. What certain subjects tend to do under stress. Body language, tone modulation, eye movement. Malik leaned forward. So the system basically learned that people who look like me, moving the way I moved, are a red flag. Nobody answered. Malik didn't shout. He didn't storm out. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out the letter. Ian Callahan's letter. He slid it across the table. Before you tweak another line of code, read that. Julian picked it up, scanning it with careful eyes. The room went quiet as he read. Even the legal rep paused. I didn't write this to sue, Malik said softly. I'm not here to destroy your company. I'm here because next time, someone might not survive being misread. Julian finished the letter. He blinked slowly, then asked, Do you know what line of our code flagged you? Malik shook his head. Julian turned his laptop toward them and typed a string of commands. He pulled up a document with layers of highlighted logic. There, he pointed, line 478-4B. What does it say? Cynthia asked. Julian read aloud. Increase threat assessment score by 0.75 if subject shows high alert gestures combined with unregistered behavioral route through aircraft cabin. Increase threat score, Malik murmured. By nearly a full point, Julian added. That alone pushes someone from monitor to intervene. And how many of those alerts have been triggered on black men? Marissa asked. Julian didn't answer right away. 86%, he said quietly. We've run the numbers internally. We've just never made them public. Malik sat back. The silence settled around them like ash after a burn. Do you know what one of the junior programmers added last month? Julian asked. One line, a test entry. It didn't get pushed to production, but it's been sitting in our sandbox environment. He pulled up another line of code, line 4827A. It read, if subject performs active aid or medical intervention confirmed by witness or biometric match, decrease threat score by full integer. That line never went live, Julian added, because it complicates protocol. The AI doesn't know how to verify moral intent. But a gun can, Malik said. A delay in reprogramming moral nuance almost got me killed. Julian nodded, slowly. I want that line pushed. Malik said, not for me. For the kid next year. For the woman with anxiety who stands too fast. For the father walking his crying toddler up the aisle mid-flight. Julian looked at the others, then at Malik. You're right, he said. We'll push it. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. You know that will require a full audit. You're opening liability. I'm opening a correction. Julian replied. Malik felt something shift in his chest. Not satisfaction, something deeper. A release. He stood. You might think this is about race, he said quietly. And yeah, it is. But it's also about what happens when we stop asking why someone's moving instead of just flagging that they are. This system nearly decided I was a threat while I was holding someone's bleeding chest in my hands. Nobody argued. As they walked out of the building, Marissa touched his arm. You're not just fixing something broken. You're changing who gets to write the next version. That night, Malik opened his journal. He hadn't written in it for months. He scribbled a single sentence. The algorithm almost failed me, but a single line of code might save the next boy who dares to care. He closed the book and looked out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance like quiet witnesses. The world outside hadn't changed much, but Malik had. And soon, so would the code. There are moments in a flight when everything goes silent, not because of turbulence, not because of announcements, but because everyone senses something has shifted and they're waiting to see what happens next. That moment happened 22 minutes before Flight 313 landed at JFK. The Air Marshal, Ian Callahan, was still unconscious in the galley. His blood had stopped seeping, thanks to Malik's pressure and Cynthia's scarf tied tightly around the man's torso. A medic on board had arrived, done what little he could, and said, "We need wheels down fast." But that wasn't the moment that changed everything. That moment came when a flight attendant named Jody Morris walked up to Malik with her hands shaking and her eyes scanning a clipboard of printed procedures. She was not cruel. She was not heartless. She was terrified. "Sir, I need you to take a seat," she said, immediately. "This is now an active security event." Malik looked up from Ian's side. His hand was still applying pressure, and his knees had gone numb from kneeling for so long. "I'm stabilizing him," he said calmly. "I understand, but you are not cleared to handle federal personnel in this capacity," Jody said, clutching the clipboard tighter. "Protocol dictates that all passengers must return to their seats once emergency response has been contacted. You're interfering with a federal extraction process." Cynthia stood beside Malik, her voice firm. "He saved his life." Jody's eyes darted from Cynthia to Malik to Ian's pale face. "That's not in question, ma'am. But we've been instructed to isolate the passenger who initiated unsanctioned medical contact with a federal officer." "You're not listening," Malik said. His voice was low, measured, controlled. He was dying. There wasn't time to ask permission. There still isn't. Jody's voice cracked. "Please, sir, you need to comply. This is protocol." The cabin behind them had gone quiet. No more movie sounds, no more babies crying. Just eyes peering over seat backs and whispers traveling faster than the aircraft itself. And then someone stood up. It was a woman in her 50s, aisle 22C. Her name was Gloria Washington, a former nurse flying home from visiting her daughter. She had watched the whole thing from her seat. Quiet, still, listening. If he leaves him now, that man might die, she said clearly. The murmurs grew louder. A man in business class added, "I saw it too. That kid didn't attack him. He caught him before he collapsed." Jody stepped back. Malik slowly looked around the cabin. He hadn't noticed how many people had been watching. People of every age and race and background. Some frightened, some uncertain. All now bearing witness to what felt like a fragile truth hanging in the air. He turned back to Jody and spoke as gently as he could. "Please," he said, "I'll sit when a trained EMT relieves me, but not a minute before. Because if he wakes up bleeding again, I need to be right here." Something shifted in Jody's face. Her hand dropped the clipboard. "I'll call the captain," she said. Cynthia exhaled. It was barely audible, but it sounded like surrender, or perhaps relief. A young boy across the aisle leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Is that guy a hero?" The mother replied, "He's a person who saw someone bleeding and didn't wait to be told it was okay to care." When Jody returned, she gave Malik a silent nod. No more orders, no more "sir, please comply." Just quiet recognition. The captain had agreed to give Malik permission to remain with the injured Marshal under watch until wheels down and medical response on board. For the remaining 20 minutes of the flight, no one moved. Some passengers cried softly, some just sat, holding hands. And somewhere, in the hush of recycled air and the steady hum of descent, something like dignity was restored. As the wheels touched the runway, applause broke out, not the kind after a smooth landing. This was different. It wasn't for the pilot. It was for the boy who had refused to leave a bleeding man. But that joy did not last long, because what followed was not gratitude. It was arrest. The moment the jet bridge connected, Malik was handcuffed. 3 federal agents boarded swiftly. No greetings, no explanation. Just, "You're coming with us." Cynthia tried to push forward. He saved that man. The lead agent didn't flinch. "We'll sort it out," passengers yelled. Gloria from 22C shouted, "He's a minor." "You're detaining a child," the business class man added. "I'll testify. I saw it all. He didn't attack anyone. Malik didn't resist. He didn't yell. He turned once to see Ian Callahan, still unconscious but alive, being wheeled off. Then he looked at Cynthia and said, "It's okay, Mom." But it wasn't. Not for Cynthia. Not for the other passengers who knew exactly what this looked like. Not for anyone who'd ever been told just follow the rules and watch those rules turn into shackles. As Malik disappeared down the jet bridge in cuffs, a little girl turned to her mother. "Why are they taking him away?" she asked. The mother didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one that made sense. The holding room at JFK Airport smelled like metal and floor cleaner. It wasn't a cell exactly, but it felt like one. Malik sat with his wrists still cuffed, though someone had loosened them once the door shut. Across from him sat a man in a gray suit who hadn't said his name, only showed a badge that read Homeland Security. The man asked questions, none of them about the bleeding, none about the air marshal. "Did you plan this? Were you carrying any concealed weapons? Who gave you permission to intervene?" Malik answered calmly, always the same way. "I saw him collapse. I acted." The man's mouth twitched, displeased by the simplicity of it. He tapped his pen and said, "You're under temporary detainment pending internal review. We'll decide what charges, if any, are appropriate." Malik nodded once. He wasn't afraid. He was exhausted, but he wasn't afraid. Cynthia had not been allowed in. Not yet. She was still outside the gate, waiting, surrounded by a growing number of passengers who refused to leave until Malik was released. Some had begun recording videos. Others had already posted. Free Malik was trending before dinner time. By the time Ian Callahan regained consciousness in the hospital later that evening, nearly 8 million people had watched the footage from a passenger's iPhone showing Malik holding pressure on Ian's wound, whispering steady words, never once panicking. By midnight, the footage had been replayed on CNN, MSNBC, and even local stations. But it was a handwritten letter that changed everything. A nurse handed it to a DOJ field agent after Ian insisted he write it, even with one arm still weak and his head bandaged. The agent read it aloud on camera the next morning. "To whom it may concern, my name is Ian Callahan. I am a federal air marshal with over 12 years of service. I was bleeding out when I collapsed on Flight 313. The young man who stabilized me is named Malik Grant. He is not a threat. He is the reason I am alive. I owe him a debt I can never repay. If you punish him for what he did, then I suggest we rewrite what security truly means in this country. Respectfully, Ian Callahan." The letter went viral within 3 hours, so when the case reached Judge Madeline Rhodes in a quiet federal courtroom the next morning, the room was packed with reporters, lawyers, and 3 members of Congress who had shown up just to observe. Malik stood beside a public defender he'd met less than an hour before. Cynthia sat in the front row. Judge Rhodes, a sharp woman in her 60s with deep-set eyes, read the charges silently. Then she looked at Malik. "Mr. Grant, you're accused of violating federal flight protocols and interfering with an active federal officer during duty. How do you plead?" Malik's voice didn't tremble. "Not guilty. And how old are you?" 15, ma'am." The judge exhaled slowly. A child stabilized a federal officer while trained adults argued over protocol. No one said anything. She looked down at the folder again, then over her glasses at the prosecutor. "And you wish to proceed?" The prosecutor hesitated. He looked at the cameras, at the people in the gallery. Then he closed the file and said quietly, "The state withdraws the charges." Cynthia burst into tears. Judge Rhodes leaned forward. "You saved a life, young man, in a system that too often punishes the brave for not asking permission. You stood firm." She stood up and left the bench without another word. Outside the courthouse, dozens of people stood cheering. Gloria Washington from the plane was there. The business-class man who had offered to testify waved a small sign, "Let courage be contagious." Malik stepped out with Cynthia's hand in his when the reporters surrounded them, microphones flashing and questions flying. Malik didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just said softly, "I did what I hoped someone would have done for me." By afternoon, Ian Callahan released a video message from his hospital bed. "Don't let the system bury stories like this," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "Don't let compassion be criminalized." Within days, a new bill was proposed in Congress titled the Flight Response Protection Act. It included clauses preventing the automatic detention of minors who assist during in-flight medical emergencies and mandated training updates for all airline staff regarding bystander response rights. But the real shift didn't happen in policy. It happened in people. Across the country, schools began holding assemblies asking students what they would have done in Malik's place. Churches preached about bravery that doesn't wear uniforms. Parents talk to their children about the cost of caring when it's inconvenient. 1 week later, Malik returned to school. His backpack was heavier than usual, but not from books. It was from the letters, hundreds of them, from strangers, from teachers, from first responders, even from a former president. But the one that mattered most was in a pale blue envelope from Ian's wife. It read, "Thank you for bringing him home to us. With love, Ella Callahan." Malik kept it in the side pocket of his bag, next to a photo he took from the plane, just a blurry image of clouds out the window. But to him, it was the sky he never stopped looking at, even when the world tried to ground him. That moment on that plane, in that stillness between fear and action, would follow him for the rest of his life. Not as a trauma, but as a truth. When asked later what he had been thinking when he pressed his hands into a stranger's wound, Malik simply said, "I wasn't thinking, I was seeing a person, a life. I couldn't pretend I didn't." He never raised his voice. He never sought the spotlight. He simply chose presence over fear, and somehow that changed everything. Malik Grant never asked to be called a hero. He didn't wear a cape. He didn't demand attention. He simply saw a man bleeding and chose to care. But in a world still gripped by fear, still haunted by prejudice, his compassion was met not with gratitude, but with cuffs. That moment, frozen in the glare of a plane's overhead light, reminds us of a brutal truth. Too often, black skin is seen as a weapon before it's ever seen as human. Yet Malik never raised his voice. He let his actions speak, and somehow that silent bravery stirred a nation. This is not just a story about race. It's a call to hold on to our shared humanity, to speak up when systems fail, to honor the quiet ones who do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. So tonight, as you close this tab, remember Malik, and ask yourself, what would you have done if you were sitting in that aisle seat? If this story left a mark on your heart, help us keep these stories alive. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories that uncover truth, compassion, and justice. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay kind, stay awake, stay human.